Well, hello, Dr. Christine, and welcome to the Rebuilding My Health Radio podcast. I am excited to have you chat with me today.
Hello. Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, good. Well, let's kind of go back to the start of kind of your health story and tell us a little bit about what was going on.
Sure. So that's honestly a bit of a tricky question because one of the things that I end up teaching people a lot around their health is how it usually comes out of a bunch of compounded stressors over a period of
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there's any one particular thing that instigated everything. I think it was a compounding effect of a lot of things. And, there's always your earlier life experiences that color things and kind of will maybe make you more predisposed towards something. So like, even if you had infections early in life, and then that can be a part of whatever you're dealing with. But for what you were asking me about, it was a time in my life where my body essentially kind of went through like a bit of a shutdown, and my metabolism kind of shut down and my hormones shut down. And it came from an amalgamation of things. I had been in graduate school, and that is no easy road and can be a bit stressful on a number of levels.
Yeah.
And it just kind of absolves your whole life for a number of years. And I had gotten injured while I was in grad school. I was like, started with like a wrist sprain, right? No big deal. And I'd been, working on changing my diet and improving my lifestyle and all the things, but it was just a huge amount of stress that was consistent over like 4 years. And then I got a worse injury of that, like 3 months later. Okay, yeah, I tore a wrist ligament. All right. And then like 2 months after that, I dislocated my knee. And when you get these injuries, it's like when you keep going, because, looking back, I probably should have just like taken a break for a little while. And but I was so close to finishing, and I was in the middle of my board exams, and I had a full class load and a full patient load, and I was working, and it was just kind of everything. And I wasn't sleeping enough and all of those things. So since I didn't take a break, I kind of kept perpetuating the injury, because a lot of people don't realize if you get injured and your body gets into an inflamed state, it actually makes your other tissues more weak. And then you're more likely to get injured again. And so then I had the knee happen, and then I just kind of kept pushing. And that one was a pretty bad one. And then 2020 happened. And a lot of the things that I had lined up for my life and work for the next couple of years evaporated instantaneously, along with a lot of finances that were put into that, and my home also, because I had just moved out of my home because I was supposed to be traveling abroad. So then I was driving across the country in my car with like a duffel bag, trying to figure out what to do. Ended up coming home, and then those injuries kind of started to continue. I was trying to do all the things that we could, exercise when I could and whatever we could during that time. And the injuries kind of got worse. And then I finally got it examined. And I was at a point where my knee was injured enough where I couldn't even go down the stairs. And there was a bit of an identity crisis tied to that, because you're no longer the person that you know yourself to be. So I was grieving my body. I was grieving who I knew myself to be. I was grieving the community in my home that I just left. I was grieving the future that had kind of just fallen apart. And I was also dealing with the physical stress. And looking back, I now know that I also had a mold exposure at this time because of the place that lovingly took me in while I was trying to figure out what to do after all of my plans went to the wayside. And then I ended up doing regenerative medicine to help my knee after interviewing 13 doctors, because 10 of them told me I had to reconstruct my knee. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. And I finally found a regenerative medicine doc who was able to correct it. And that was wonderful. And we did like 3 sessions. And it worked. Like, my knee is back to normal. I'm back to running. I'm back to exercising. Like, that was amazing. We regrew bone and cartilage. Like, that blew my mind. But it's an inflammatory process. And so you're inducing extra inflammation in the body. And then I started to get these funny food sensitivities. and I couldn't quite figure it out. And then I started seeing a practitioner to help me out with that. And very well intentioned, but was pretty heavy handed with the supplements. I was on like 2 pages of supplements. And I think we just pushed my body a little too fast at the same time that I was probably having a little bit of an environmental exposure. Although I'm not sure. I had a mold exposure a couple times over the course of like 1 or 2 years. And I had moved out of that place when I started the treatment. But then in the next place, at some point, mold turned up. I don't know when it happened. So it was just kind of this combination of stuff. And then I had a big like personal stressor, and the job I was working at didn't work out. And, and it was just too much. And I just kind of, at that point, was just at an emotional breaking point. Like I just couldn't quite hold everything that was happening. And I think it was also tied to the environmental exposure, which inflames your brain, which makes you unable to process your emotions and your reality as well as you could. And so then it sends you down that emotional cycle. So it's like, it's a vicious cycle where when you are dealing with inflammation of some sort, it changes the way you think, which stresses you out, which causes more inflammation. So I know there was some leaky gut tied in there too. But I got to the point where I was having all this stuff happening with my skin, and I was becoming really sensitive and allergic to foods. Like that's how I know I would, my skin would flare up whenever I ate something my body didn't agree with. And it got to the point where I couldn't even do supplements. My body didn't even agree with like B vitamins. And I had lost about a fifth or sixth of my body weight because I couldn't really eat. I was still trying to exercise. I tried to fast my way out of it, but that's a terrible thing to do when your adrenals are tanked. So that's why my hormones tanked, is because I just didn't give my body the resources that it needed. And then it was just a very patient process of kind of listening to my body and realizing that it wasn't going to be something outside of me that fixed me.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And that is such an important realization. You were kind of like throwing all this, stuff at it. And so how did you kind of realize that it needed to come from within, and what were those first steps to do that?
I had no other options because it's like every practitioner, and I love my colleagues, and they were all so well-intentioned and, trying to put their artistry into it. But my body was just at a place where it was like, no more things from the outside. And, so yeah, I just got to a point where I had to really just listen to my body. I had to get very careful with my food. That was, food. I think people misunderstand like food sensitivities sometimes because they change over time. And really they're a symbol and a signal of where your body's at. And if you have a bunch of food sensitivities, it means there's other things to address. You just use food to control your symptomatology or whatever you're dealing with. And so I used that as a tool, but that wasn't the solution. It was just how I was maintaining. And I realized with some pretty deep reflection from a variety of different spaces I created for myself for that I had sunk into a state of just waiting for the next shoe to drop and the next enemy to appear and the next thing to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And I was just stuck in this fight or flight state where I was just waiting for the world to crumble. And I got to the point where I didn't really trust the universe anymore. And that's, when you get to that point, that's a really hard place to be, because it's like you don't really trust the universe. You don't really trust other people. You don't really trust yourself to make good decisions. And so you're just in this constant state of feeling not okay and worried and unable to be excited about your life. And when you're stuck there, it's a really tough place to be stuck. And sometimes you need some help to get out of it. But ultimately, I turned to the only thing I had left that I'd known of, which was meditation. And I had been working with meditation for a while because I'm also like a vinyasa yoga teacher. And so I had learned that long ago. And then that led me into learning about different meditation teachers like Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so I ended up using a lot of his work. But at the time, I needed different kinds of meditation for different things. And I think that's one thing that people misunderstand about meditation is saying that you meditate is like saying you listen to music. It's a very broad statement. There's a lot of different kinds of meditation. And I love Dr. Dispenza's work, but for the place that I was at, I just needed some nurturing. And so there was another artist that I was listening to, and her stuff was a bit more nurturing during that time. And then when I got to a place where I was more ready to be coached, then I was able to use Dr. Dispenza's work. So I used a variety of things, but it ultimately came back to the practice of going inward and having conversations with my body and letting it know that it was not under attack and it could calm down. And that also changes your gut health. They've shown in a lot of science that meditation and mindfulness completely changes your gut biome. And also stress changes your gut biome. A lot of people don't know that you literally have bacteria in your gut that have receptors for and kind of feed on your stress hormones. And when you get stressed out, they grow. So when you get stressed out, you actually create dysbiosis in your gut, along with inducing leakiness, which can then create endotoxemia or like accidentally poisoning your own blood from the inside. And so I think that was a component of it too, but the meditation allowed that to calm down enough that I could bring food and nourishment and nutrients back into my life. But as the person who refused to stop for a number of years, this was life finally forcing me to stop. And I think that is the weird hidden gift in going through something like this, is it shakes you out of your automatic programming and forces you to reprioritize your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, we tend to be kind of action focused, with healing, like, what can you do and throw at it and, all that. And, it's a little bit of like, sounds like, stepping back and just kind of being and like, tuning into your body and, listening to that intuition of what you needed to do to heal.
Super humbling, especially as a practitioner, because I was trained in functional medicine at this point. So here I was with all of this knowledge and none of it was applying. And it was like, it just made me really review what functional medicine is and what it means. And I think it's really easy to do functional medicine, but still be doing it in a conventional or more like industrial model where it's still the pill for every ill thing, even though it's a vitamin. And that's not always what's needed. Sometimes you have to address someone's energetic body, which is what was going on with my body, right? I had to address my energetic body. I'd addressed the physical, I'd addressed the nutritional. I hadn't addressed like the way that I was thinking. And I am finding, and I realized through my own body, like if you're in that state, you're not going to absorb the nutrients anyway. Like your body is in a physiological state where it's not focused on absorption. It's focused on breakdown and not building. And if you stay in that state, it's going to be breaking down your cells for resources. But if you stay in that state too long, your organs start to break down and your biochemistry starts to break down. And that was kind of what was happening. So I just had to do a little bit of a mental reset because it was really and that was also humbling, right? To realize that like you're your biggest problem.
Right.
And have to take responsibility for that.
Right. Yeah. Right. That is hard. Gosh. So I am curious because you mentioned a more nurturing meditation practice, and I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing, who you turn to. Yeah.
I love her stuff. Her name is Sarah Blondin, and she's on Insight Timer. if you've never heard of Insight Timer, it is a phenomenal app that is basically just a ocean of mindfulness and wellness resources, and it's mostly free. I ended up doing a lot of her free tracks, which are, shorter and a little bit more manageable when your brain is like on fire and not working and you don't have short-term memory. Because that was the other thing that happened that I think was the most scary part of anything, was like my brain wasn't working. And I'd walk into another room and not know why I went in. And I couldn't really do my work because my work involves analyzing really complex lab data, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't analyze the data. And that also contributed to the identity crisis. But yeah, Sarah Blondin's meditations were just very nurturing and soothing during that time. And, sometimes you need the feminine energy and sometimes you need a masculine energy. And so the feminine kind of holds you and nurtures you where you're at, and the masculine kind of invites you forward. And it just depends on where you're at and what you need. And, and it's just flipping through resources like that and finding what resonates for you at the time. And someone else had introduced me to her, and I was so grateful. And then she has like a little course on there that I did as like a 10-day course about, kind of communing with the purpose of emotions. And that was really helpful too. So yeah, it was, it was basically me coming out of grad school and academia and doing nothing but all the things that I was supposed to do for other people for, basically a decade, to finally being forced to take a break and pay attention to myself. And I think that's the best way that I can say it, is just being forced to actually commune with yourself, and face all of the emotions that you've put on the back burner to be able to do all the things you're supposed to do. And those emotions are chemistry. And if you don't feel them and you don't move them, because they say, emotions are energy in motion, they're going to get stuck in your tissues as chemistry. And that's essentially kind of what was happening, and why my immune system was on guard. My immune system was just trying to protect me. It's just doing its job. I was just sending it the wrong signals.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah. So your meditation work was around emotions, kind of specifically, and that kind of ultimately helped your body feel safer. Is that, or it's just kind of processing those emotions, or
Yeah, it was a blend of stuff. I had some family members that were worried about me at the time, and they asked if I would go on an antidepressant, and I said no, because I didn't want to numb myself. And also, they change your gut biome like permanently, and people don't talk about that. And it changes your neurotransmitters. And not to say that they aren't warranted and help a lot of people at certain times, but it just wasn't the route that I wanted to go. And also, I'm like, no, I have emotions for a reason. Like, this sucks, but I need to figure out like what needs to be moved, what needs to be processed. And so then I had somebody suggest trying basically like a little psychedelic therapy, which at that point I was pretty desperate. And I was like, you know what, I'm way more open to an exploration than a numbing. And so that's what I ended up doing at one point. I ended up trying ketamine therapy because it had just become legalized. And I did that with a MD and actually a male counselor that was there during the sessions. And then on the outside, I was also working with a female counselor, which the masculine feminine balance, that's the first time I've worked with two counselors at once. And it was incredibly helpful. And a lot of counselors won't let you do that. So it's just, I liked that they were able to do that. And the woman, she specialized in integration after those experiences. And I was at a time where, I couldn't really work anyway. Like I wasn't functioning, and it's irresponsible as a practitioner to be working on other people when you're in that state. It's not honoring to them. And so I just took time off work when I was going through that process. It was a 3-week process. And I think taking that time off work was probably the most important thing that I did, because it allowed me to actually reflect on what I was going through. And I think a lot of people, like, I know plant medicine and psychedelic medicine is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And I actually think that's going to be a really beneficial thing to the world, but it also needs to be done correctly. And I would say that 90% of the medicine is intention, or basically another word for it is ceremony, right? Like, and that was, I traveled before grad school and lived abroad for a while and ended up meeting a variety of healthcare practitioners, including shamans, and seeing old cultural things like old cultural ceremonies and kind of remembering the importance of ceremony, which we've very much lost in our modernized culture. But, ceremony can be as simple as sitting there with a note card and writing down what you want to bring into your life and what you want to let go of. And like, maybe you burn that note card, or maybe you don't. Maybe you put it in a box. Maybe you sit there and do that, and you have a necklace that you like, and you hold your necklace in your hand and you think about those things, and you like imbue that energy into that necklace or a stone or a totem of some kind. And then you have that as a reminder. And the intention is the ceremony, right? So taking time to be intentional about it and taking time to reflect afterwards. Like, ketamine is a weird substance. It's can be really beneficial because they say the purpose of it is to basically break you out of your default mode network. And in neurology, that means your autopilot. So it is a chance for you to kind of be kicked out of whatever rut you're in. But if you don't allow yourself reflection time and you just go straight back into your patterns, same goes for meditation, it's not going to matter that much. And so it was an interesting time to be able to do that. And the way that I kind of describe it to people is it was like you're kind of in the mess of your life and you're stuck in your little rut. And then it's like taking the elevator up and having the doors opened to what it can feel like to feel peace and love and calmness, and to be reminded what that feels like. So when the doors close and the elevator comes back down, you now have a map of what to work on. And then that's what you do in meditation is you practice those feelings and you practice bringing them back into your life, and it fosters those neural pathways and that chemistry without the substance. The substance is just like an opening. And so that's kind of what that was. And when people do those series, they usually recommend a series of 6 over the course of a few weeks. And it was kind of this chance to like go back up, be reminded, come back down, practice, go back up, be reminded, come back down, practice. And at the time I was processing just some of those old things that I'd put on the back burner for many, many years. And I think it was important to move through, but it was important to have support during that time and to allow the integration time. Because the reason I say it's kind of a weird substance is the best way I can describe it is that the epiphanies that come from it are subtle and slippery. So it's like you feel them and you see them, but unless you take time to write about them and reflect on them and connect with them, they're really easy to forget. And it works on a pretty subconscious level. So it's like you may not be totally aware of the changes that are happening, but you just know that things feel a bit different. And for me, that was just like I didn't feel so reactive and defensive. And I was able to like remember that it was okay to feel calm. Because I think we can get stuck in a state of not feeling calm because it feels safe, because you feel like you're looking out for yourself. And that's how you can like get addicted to anxiety, which is a really weird concept for people, but it happens.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Definitely. Been there, really.
I think we all have at some point.
Yeah. Well, so this is so interesting. And so really, with the meditation and the ketamine therapy, it's like your body were you noticing that you were starting to shift? Things were starting to shift. Maybe you weren't as reactive. You were able to like digest things.
Yeah, it was a slow shift. I also, before I went and had that very first session, found a bunch of mold in my apartment. So that was awesome. So as I was going through this series, my apartment was being ripped apart and remediated, and I was staying somewhere else. But it was interesting. So, when I look back, there's a part of it where I was like, I was probably dealing with a lot of toxicity, and that's technically like another thing that my liver needs to process. So, but whenever you're going through a time that hard in your life, like there's usually too much going on in your body anyway. But yes, like I did start to feel better when I was finally starting to calm down. But I had kind of started with the Sarah Blondin meditations, the more nurturing ones. And then I was going through this series, and that's when I did her 10-day courses as I was going through this series. And then it would just give me space to like think about the purpose of an emotion and then reflect on what I'd been feeling and reflect on what came up and things like that. And, like when I think back and I try to remember what happened in those sessions, I don't have a super clear memory, but I do have my writing from that I did right afterwards, which I think was important because I can go back and remember what I got out of it and then reflect on that. And
Yeah. Oh, nice.
yeah, like that's what makes it a little bit different, right? Is it's like your
Mhm.
memory is not as strong as maybe with
Mhm.
some other items. But as I did that, that allowed me enough resiliency to step into more of a place of being coached. And then that's when I dove back
Mhm.
into Dr. Dispenza's work. And I love his work. And he's like heading a ton of research in the field of meditation that's really incredible. And like they have thousands upon thousands of data points. And so they're showing this in people's biology, which is great. And I dove into that, but I was so like malnourished and exhausted from everything that had been going on that I couldn't even sit up straight for an hour to do the meditation. And
Wow.
I would start getting exhausted partway through, and I would end up face down on the floor, falling asleep at the end of it. And then I'd sit there and I'd sleep for like 20 minutes and I'd get back up. And I had to do that for about 2 weeks before it really
Wow.
started kind of landing in my system and landing in my body every day, just passing out on my floor after meditating. And during this time, I had another friend who had reached out to me, and she was not, she was ill from getting sick a couple times and then being put on well-intentioned medications that weren't working for her body. And then her practitioner got distracted and she kind of got left behind. And so I had told her, I was like, hey, like, this is what I'm doing. I think you should start doing this stuff. And then like send me your labs and we'll look over them. And I sent her some of the stuff that I was doing. And within 2 weeks before we even started using nutrition in her life, she was already feeling better. And she had, this was someone who like couldn't even walk her dog, and like her heart was pounding, and she used to be able to deadlift like 200 pounds. So she was going through a
Wow.
similar process of like a whole identity crisis. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so the meditation was working for her too. And it was such a humbling process to basically start doing meditations. And I went to like one of his progressive workshops, just like a 3-day thing. And at the end of the 3 days, my symptoms were pretty much gone. And I was like eating the
Wow.
foods that I couldn't eat, and my skin had cleared up. And then I went and just kind of integrated that for a little while, and for about a week. And then I came back and did a work thing and encountered a stressor from some of the past stuff, and my symptoms came back.
Oh my gosh.
And I fell
Wow.
out of meditation, and then they were there. And then I started meditating again, and they dissipate and go away. So it was like this interesting process of going back and forth of like, all right, well, if I meditate, they're not there. And if I don't meditate, they're there. And I have started to notice much more subtle things about myself and my approach to the world that I didn't really notice before I took so much time to like observe myself and my thoughts. And so now I'm just, working on maintaining the meditations to continue breaking me out of old habits, but it's really hard. Like it's hard to break habits, especially when you're in your home and you're being triggered by subconsciously by the things you're surrounded by every day. And so it's a process of like doing this regularly, and not just doing it in the morning, but like remembering that feeling throughout the day. That was one of my big
Mhm.
realizations, is that I can meditate in the morning, but unless I remember to come back to this feeling like every 5 to 10 minutes, that morning meditation only matters so much.
Mhm.
And so it's like physical therapy for your brain. You just have to
Mhm.
retrain your brain how you're operating. And I think a lot of people forget that like you are not your thoughts.
Yeah.
You are the being observing your mind. And if you can start to have that relationship with it, where you realize that you don't have to listen to everything it says and you can choose what you want to listen to, it creates a really different dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful. That's really powerful, important observation there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Dr. Christine, what is kind of your maintenance protocol now for kind of continuing to support your body?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am still working on clearing out some of the mycotoxins because that's just a process, especially when you've had multiple exposures. And I ended up getting a second water leak in my apartment in a year.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I know, like, I was like, I don't understand. Even the apartment complex was like, we don't understand why this is happening. Like, this is just, because
Yeah.
there's like a water heater leak and then like a sprinkler bust during a cold front. And like, those are just
Yeah.
like, I can't blame anyone for that. And,
Yeah.
yeah. So when that second one happened, the remediation team came in and they put all the fans down to dry everything, but they had no exhaust and opened no windows and left the door to the room open. So when I walked in the apartment, I got this face full of dust of
Oh
any
no.
old pores that were present from the last time, even though I did a lot of cleaning and all the things. And like stuff just came back. And so then I got really careful with my food again. So it's been this process, and this is what I teach people, is like how to listen to your body, like what's going on right now. You might do fine with the food one week and then not fine with it the next week because you had a crazy stressful week at work and your body's just not in
Mhm.
a place where it can handle it. So that's the capacity, right? Like we all have a
Mhm.
threshold and a capacity, and it's about what is filling that capacity. And if you have stress filling it, you're going to have less room to be lenient with your food. And if you have bad food filling it, you're going to have less capacity for stress or an environmental toxin exposure, things like that. So that's why when you asked me initially, like what started, I'm like, that's a really hard question because it's about like what's going on in your life at the time. And if you have a mold exposure, you're not going to be as resilient. And if you're super stressed out, then you probably need to be more careful with your food and like maybe not drink alcohol. And if you can start to think about your body like that, I think that's a much more sustainable way to live. And so for the maintenance process, that's kind of what I do is it's like, all right, well, where's my body at this week? If it's being really reactive, I'm probably not going to have any alcohol and I'm probably going to be more careful with my food. But if it's pretty calm and it's feeling better, then I can be a little bit more lenient with my food. And now I can finally bring supplements back in. And so, with the way that I practice, I'm much more of like a cellular energy medicine doc, because that's a lot of what I learned through my own process is um, like you can treat all the signals between the cells, like hormones and neurotransmitters and things like that. But if the factory in the cell isn't working well, those signals aren't going to matter. And so I really focus on cellular integrity first, which includes your gut lining and your mitochondria and components that the cells need to heal, like choline, which also helps with your detoxification and your bile, and it helps your brain and your liver. And so I look at the body in this very holistic way where I'm like, okay, what are the most foundational pieces that I can provide that it's asking for so that it can go through its own natural process? And that's kind of what I try to foster. Like I try pretty hard to not prevent things or shut things down or inhibit them. And I try more to foster the right systems that will send the right signals that will inhibit what needs to be inhibited. So for my immune system, for example, right? Like instead of going after trying to shut down my immune system, I went after what was causing it to be flared, which was my gut and my environment and my thinking. And then when I addressed all of those, it started to calm down a lot. And so now I'm just in the process of continuing to use certain binders to remove mycotoxins while I still continue to heal my gut lining. And, I do that with a fairly robust, like multivitamin, multi-mineral that I really like that has a lot of good antioxidants in it. I think people underestimate the importance of antioxidants. Like they're very protective for your body. And like I love things like glutathione, but it's not the only one. Like you need other things. You
Mhm.
need flavonoids and polyphenols and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I focus on how can I protect my body and how can I nourish it, and while also gently allowing it to cleanse and detox, which is why like sleep is super important. I'm still trying to get better at my sleep. And so yeah, that's a good estimate of how I do things. And I've started incorporating breath work more too. And I think that's something I underestimated in the past of how powerful it
Mhm.
can be. So
Yeah.
even, if you're a person that needs that mindset shift, but you're a person that doesn't want to use any kind of substance, explore breath work. breath work creates your own chemistry. So that's, another option. And doing that with an instructor or a coach can be really cool. And now I actually work with a place in Denver called the Zen Den, and we're working on creating programs for people that basically uses breathwork and biohacking technology to induce, and intention and ceremony and guidance to basically create a little bit of a mental shift in the same way you might get from a psychedelic experience, but without the use of substances. So that is possible. And it's really just about retraining your perspective while having some support in the process.
Yeah. So interesting. I'll have to check out the Zen Den.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah. Wow. This has been super interesting for me, and I know it will be for other folks as well. So Dr. Christine, kind of, I guess, what advice maybe or words of wisdom would you leave with folks who might be struggling with health challenges and feel stuck?
Sure. I guess the first thing I'd say is be kind to yourself and just recognize, take a minute to recognize that you're injured, whether that's a physical injury or a mental injury or a chemical injury. You're wounded. You need to take time to heal, and that's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that you need to rest and recover and recuperate. And I know that can be really tough when you have other people you're looking out for, like a family or anything like that. But at the same time, that's what family and friends are for, is you can be vulnerable with them and tell them where you're at and say, hey, I need to figure out a way to support myself while I take a little bit of time to heal. How can we figure that out? And that is important. And, and if you don't have family or friends and you're feeling alone, because I know that can be a thing too, just finding a practitioner that you want to work with, or asking a friend for help, or joining an online group program so that you have some kind of support. Even just Facebook groups. When I was going through the mold thing, I was part of this mold Facebook group, and it was really helpful. And so just, finding some community, finding some support, acknowledging that you might need to ask for some help, and that's okay. And then kind of really doing backing out for a second once you've stopped and taking a big look at your life and being okay, where do I need support? What do I need to pull out? What do I need to put in? And if you don't even know where to start, that's also what asking practitioners are for, or listening to podcasts like this, right? It lets you know what's available, and then you just pick something and you just start. And if you don't know where to start, diet is probably the best place to start. Just get careful with your food. And obviously none of this is medical advice, but if I just gave a general recommendation, it's focus on paleo for the most part, clean protein, veggies, nuts and seeds, and low sugar fruit. That's a good place to start. And that means no processed food. That means stuff that's gone through a machine or been made into another form. None of that. Just whole, real foods that are ingredients rather than made of ingredients. And then you can even just start with breath work and just start sitting there and listening to your breath and taking that time to just forget about your problems and forget about all the crazy stuff that's going on in your life, and just forget about the world, and even kind of forget about your body, and just kind of sit there in this calm, peaceful space for a couple minutes. The world will not go into chaos if you're absent for minutes. And taking that time to let your chemistry reset. That's really what it is. It's taking a moment to allow your body to feel safe enough to enter into a healing and building state. And then, just slowly seeking the next thing that you need, and just one step at a time. And also the way that you speak to your body, because that was something else that I went through. Was I was really frustrated with my injuries, and I would be my bad knee, it's ruined my life, all these things. And I was wait a second, you're not my bad knee. You're my knee that I've injured 6 times, and you need some extra love. And that's how I think of you. You're my body part that needs extra love. And maybe that's your brain. Maybe your brain went through a traumatic event, and people are if you go through something traumatic, losing your job or losing a loved one or losing your home, the neurological community now classifies PTSD as brain injury. So sometimes you have to focus on nurturing your brain. And that starts with your thoughts and how you speak to yourself and how you speak to your body. So just starting to reflect on those things and acknowledge that if it's really hard and you're feeling pulled back towards this really tough spot that you're in and kind of the little bit of a mindset of feeling like a victim, just know that you'll get a lot more healing out of feeling empowered. So if you can just kind of accept whatever happened in your life as a thing that happened and realize that moving forward is one of the best things you can do, that's a more empowering place. And I think if I had one really big realization from the whole experience that I thought was very important to share, it would be that healing has much less to do with your story than you think, and a lot more to do with remembering everything that it made you forget, which is like how to feel safe and how to feel joy and how to feel happy and how to feel excited. And like, yeah, you can forget how to feel those things. And, you know, when we talk about meditation and practicing those emotions, people are like, I don't know how to do that. I haven't felt that in 10 years. And it's about using your imagination and looking at other people and people that you admire and imagining what it would feel like to be them and imagining how they feel when they're happy. And then letting that image of them go and just holding on to the feeling and marinating in it and practicing it and letting your chemistry get familiar with it and laying that pathway in your brain.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. I love that. Yeah. And you've inspired me. Yeah. To really kind of take some of the steps that you mentioned here to apply to my own life. So, so thank you for that. So Dr. Christine, tell us a little bit more about your work now, who you work with, and the types of type of work that you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I work with a lot of different things. So I have been in the realm of functional medicine for, about a decade because I took time before I went to grad school and I worked in a couple different offices, and then I worked abroad and worked in hospitals and worked in different care settings. And then ultimately, after talking to a lot of different degrees and practitioners and trying to figure out which route to go, I ended up going to chiropractic school because of the way that we were taught to think about health. That was why I wanted to go there. And it teaches you to think about life force and the flow of energy and honoring someone's system and listening, not just with your ears, but with your hands. And it's just a really different approach to health that I really enjoyed. I'm sure there's a lot of other degrees I could have gotten where I also would have been happy, but that was just the one I picked, and it allowed me the freedom to do what I wanted. And then I continued my functional medicine study and studied with the Institute for Functional Medicine. And I also do some perinatal pediatric stuff. Now I've incorporated some dry needling into my practice, which has been amazing for athletes and like breaking up old scar tissue. I also do something called neuro-emotional technique, which is a way to kind of help the subconscious mind bring thoughts for processing to the conscious mind. So it's not therapy. Like I work with therapists and counselors and I'll refer people to them, but it's just like a way that in office we can kind of see if there's some emotion that's holding you up. And then there's other techniques I use around that too, called like the rapid rewire method. And I use a different technique for helping kind of break that fight or flight state for people, which is what got me into bodywork in the first place. Because, going way far back, which I kind of skipped this in the story, that's, in college and stuff, I tried the conventional route and I'd been put on different medications for anxiety and things like that. And they just kind of made it worse. And then that's when I got into meditation, was after I saw a PT who did a neurological technique that reset my nervous system. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I haven't felt like this in I don't know how long. And it was because I had finally entered into a calm state. And then that allowed me to take back my own natural chemistry and not need to, and just kind of, the prescriptions weren't working for me. And so then exploring that route. So I incorporate that into my practice now. And if somebody comes in and they're in a bit of a fight or flight state, which like there's certain signals that you get as a practitioner where you can kind of tell that. And it's like if someone is delivering me their entire story of like the last 5 years and all these crazy health traumatic things that have happened to them, and they have like a totally calm demeanor and straight face and no emotion, I know that that person is a little disconnected from their body as a dissociative state to protect themselves. But that's the person that's not going to integrate the nutrition if we start with supplements. So sometimes I'll start with the trauma clearing technique and just helping. It's like rebooting a computer, right? We just kind of reboot their nervous system. And that's what chiropractic is for. I think a lot of people just think of it as like cracking and injuries, but no, the purpose of chiropractic is to balance your nervous system and to help your body and your brain communicate correctly. Like that's what chiropractic is for. And we call it like helping your life force to flow better. And because your nervous system is what signals everything else in your body. So if that's balanced, the signaling chemistry behind that is going to change. So yeah, I kind of incorporate all of those things. It really just depends on what somebody comes in with. But in general, I'll say that my niche is that I do hidden injury recovery and chronic inflammation prevention. And a lot of people ask me like, oh, well, what's a hidden injury? And I was like, well, like you can sprain your ankle, but people forget that you get a little bit of leaky gut when you get injured. And so the leaky gut is the hidden injury. Or, you know, maybe you're having some thyroid issues, but instead of me only looking at the signals that are being sent around the thyroid, my question is, well, why do you have thyroid issues? And, you know, people will be like, I got Hashimoto's out of nowhere. I'm like, it wasn't out of nowhere. It was out of the last like 10 years. And we just need to look at what compounded and do the opposite. And so it's teaching people how to look at themselves in that way. And I think I've been shifting a lot more into education because I've realized like, I don't necessarily want to save people. I kind of want to teach them how to save themselves. And I think that's a much more sustainable model. And it's empowering, right? Because our whole healthcare system revolves around being saved. And that's a really victim mindset, disempowering place to be, where you always feel like you have to have somebody else to fix you versus understanding how your body works and being able to listen to it and think your way through things logically and come to your own conclusions of what's best for you, which is, you know, that was kind of my story, is like, I loved my colleagues and my practitioners that were trying to help me. But at some point I just had to stop and listen to myself instead and like really go in and ask my body what it needed. And my body was like, I need nothing except for you to sit here and like meditate and drink water and like eat only these couple nourishing foods. And then like, that's what I need. And so it was just, it was a process to go through that. And now I just kind of teach other people how to do that in the same way. And I do a lot of custom lab testing as well. But I also do something in the office called applied kinesiology, which is basically a way of testing neurology in the body to really be able to determine what its priority stressor is. So I'll do that kind of stuff in office, which allows me to kind of care for people in between the labs, which I really like. Because the other thing I learned as a patient, it's really freaking lonely. And you can go and have a really wonderful appointment with a practitioner, and then the time in between, you feel like the loneliest person in the world. So now I try really hard to create content for people that they can use in between our appointments. And I do group programs because I think the community aspect is really hard when you're injured or ill or whatever, because you're usually kind of retreated. So I love doing like Zoom group classes because it gives people a place to be in community while they're healing and realize that they're not alone. So yeah, it's a variety of things, and it really just depends on what people come in with. But I love working with active people who have had some kind of life disrupt and helping them heal to the best capacity so that they don't get re-injured, whether that's a physical injury, a chemical injury, or a mental injury.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about, you know, kind of, teaching people like, or kind of giving them the tools to take care of themselves. So they're not always like, you know, turning to, you know, okay, what externally can I do? You know, you're kind of equipping them with a lot of the things that they need to kind of do that on their own. So,
yeah. And, you know, and working with a practitioner is important when you need it, obviously. Like it's very important to have someone on your journey with you when you're going through an extra hard time. But at the same time, I can't tell you how many of my patients where we do just kind of an analysis of their life, make some lifestyle shifts, and they feel better in like 2 weeks just from doing like a couple lifestyle shifts. So I always try to use lifestyle and food as medicine before anything else. And that is where the education comes in. And I think education about how your own body works is one of the major things lacking in our healthcare system, because you have other people analyzing you and telling you what's going on with you, but nobody teaching you why or how that works. So that's why I do
Mhm.
like a lot of physiology education on my social media channels and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, tell us where you are on social media, your handles, and where we can find
Sure.
you.
Yeah. So on Instagram, that's one where I put a lot of stuff up. And sometimes I'll just do like quick little 90-second reels of something about your health. And sometimes I'll do longer interviews like this. I kind of treat it like a podcast. And that's just Dr. Christine Smith, Christine Smith. And then that's the same on Facebook as well. And then on YouTube, um, that name that name was taken. So it's my practice name, which is Depth Wellness, like you have depth, DEPTH. So just YouTube Depth Wellness, and all of those are pretty good places to follow any of the talks that I've done or any of the education that I like to do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on to share your story and your wisdom. It's been inspiring and insightful for me. I'm going to get back to my meditation practice, which I've not necessarily been great about. And yeah, just a good reminder of different ways that we can really nurture ourselves that are simple, honestly. So thank you.
Well, and one of the ways that I think about, like, if you've fallen off of some practice that you want to have in your life, because I used to kind of be a part of myself when I did that, or kind of all or nothing, is like, even if you can only sit there for 5 minutes, just do it. Just show up for the 5 minutes, and you create this consistency and this regular pattern of showing up, even if it's not perfect or the way that you were intending for it to be. But now you've at least kept a promise to yourself, and you believe yourself when you say you're going to do things later. So I've tried to bring that kind of kindness and grace into my life of like, just keeping a consistent pattern of the things that I'll say that I do, even if it's not perfect. So like, what's my big goal? What's my ideal goal? And then what's the small thing I can do if I can't do that idyllic one?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Excellent advice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Christine. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun. I hope it helps some people in their own journey.
I know it will. So take care.
Thanks. You too.